Hey guys, when you are watching your favorite movie, chances are everything you're hearing is a lie. What? And this is because everything you're hearing was most likely created in a studio after the movie was shot.
No!
And this is the art of sound design, my friends. It all started back in 1927 when Jack Foley was on set shooting and thought, oh, wait a second. This sound we're recording is not good enough. What if we record the sound separately in post after we're done shooting? Then we sync it up with the picture later in post.
Damn!
And this opened the door to endless possibilities when it comes to sound recording. First of all, what is sound design? Or what elements of sound does a film have? Well, we have dialogue, music, sound effects. Well, you know what guys? I'll just let these guys explain better.
I like to describe sound, at least movie sound, as a tree of sound. It has three main branches: dialogue, music, and sound effects. But inside those branches, or below those branches, are extensions of different kinds of sound. Dialogue has got production sound and ADR, added sound later. Music has got score and source music. Sound effects has got a whole lot of different branches: Foley, backgrounds, atmosphere, hard effects. There's a whole lot of different sound editors, each one cutting different things in different locations. The difference between a sound editor and a sound mixer is the sound editor will assemble the sounds and cut them, and there may be more than one sound editor. There could be 10. And each person then will be responsible for a certain aspect of the sound, not all the sound.
The sound effects editor will compile sounds, go out and record sounds, put sounds together to picture.
At a point when the film is ready to show, we're going to have to mix these together. Only at that point do these three elements come together in a room like this. They are then put together in a sort of a recipe that the mixer will then be the controller of the flavors of those sounds. And then he'll feature one sound over another. The music may be stronger here, or the sound effects may be stronger here. That recipe then is in his hands. And as a mixer, he'll then control the overall soundtrack of the film.
So sound mixing is bringing dialogue, music, and sound effects to a room like this. We play through the reel and balance and mix so that they play and balance well against one another. A sound supervisor will be hired on the show. He will put a crew together, and he works closely with the director. They'll speak about the vision of the film and what kind of sound the director wants for the movie, and then we'll start putting a soundtrack together.
Okay, now that we know what sound design is and how this beautiful, complex post-production process takes place, let's shed the light on the sound design of two of the best films ever been made in the history of cinema.
Wait for it. Here it comes.
Saving Private Ryan and No Country for Old Men. Why I chose these two films specifically? Well, both films use sound in a groundbreaking way that amplify their storytelling. But, and a big but, in a very different approach. Saving Private Ryan on one hand relies heavily on intense, realistic soundscape to portray the horror of war. No Country for Old Men, on the other hand, did the complete opposite. It often employs mysterious silences, which heightens suspense and the sense of fear. Saving Private Ryan bombards the senses to create an overwhelming and disorienting experience, while No Country for Old Men does the complete opposite. Again, relying on silence and ambient sound to create unease. This contrast in sound design highlight two distinct approaches to manipulate the audience engagement. One by filling the space with noise, the other by stripping it away. The only common factor that both films had was not to use music score. To be precise, Saving Private Ryan did use music score, but very minimal. And the reason for this was to give the film a stronger sense of realism. When speaking about Saving Private Ryan, it caught my attention what Spielberg has said to the producer of the film when they were in pre-production. He said, "I don't want this to sound like Hollywood." Spielberg has refused to use any of the sound effect libraries they had at the time, and instead decided to create and record all the sounds of the film organic. The film's sound design, particularly in the iconic D-Day beach scene, is admired for its gritty realism. Gunfire, explosion, and the muffled underwater moments placed viewers directly into chaos.
This is Foley, sound effects of equipment, footsteps, and sand. These sounds are as important to me as the dialogue because this scene is about the experience of a soldier in battle, not about the battle itself. So hearing the soldiers move is an important emotional component of the scene. Foley obviously is done in a studio with props performed against the AFX. I put the most important sound to me first. These are bullet buys. So no gunshots, just bullet buys. You notice some of those bullet buys are sunk to a bullet that you see hit, but we're not hearing the bullet hit yet. We're just hearing the buy. This is so I can control the level of all the different elements later on. Emotionally, I thought bullet buys were an important sound for this because it's what soldiers told me they remembered from being in battle. Bullet hits. Now, these are the hits that are on screen for the most part. The whole scene is shot really, you rarely see the guns shooting, except for this one moment coming up. You don't see gun shooting, you're being shot at. So the gun shooting was the least important element of the guns in the scene. It really was about bullet hits and bullet buys.
And the most important element to us, sound-wise, were bullet impacts. Because if you're being shot at, that's the key sound. I remember getting a stack of cue sheets when I was pre-mixing bullet hits. Usually you'll get a stack of cue sheets. They're just a little stack, and you go through and you do your mix. I get this. It looked like a phone book. Each bullet hit is cut individually by hand. You know, it's a very delicate, time-consuming process.
So these are specific guns. A lot of the guns we're hearing here occasionally are, well, this is the MG42. MG42 was the machine gun the Germans had that fired at a faster rate than any of the Allied machine guns. The Allied soldiers nicknamed it Hitler's zipper because the sound of the MG42 sounded to them like a zipper.
It was an idea of Stevens to have these moments where the Tom Hanks character would be shell-shocked, would take the battle in without normal sound.
So I designed a sequence where when an explosion hits near Captain Miller, all the sound goes out. And that came from an actual veteran that told me that was how it affected him. So it put you deep inside his experience.
Point of view is great for sound because it allows you to go inside somebody's head. I was trying to imagine what it would be like to hear only the sound of yourself. I remember the sound of listening to a seashell. Usually what you're hearing is just the echo of the world around you roaring in your head. But to kind of simulate that, I recorded ocean sounds, played them over a speaker, and then recorded them with a microphone through a long tube.
And then moved the tube slowly to get this swimming quality.
And then would make this resonant seashell sound. Stephen had this idea of a rising whistle at the end. I don't even know what I used, but it's like a psychological tea whistle that rises and peaks right when we snap back into reality. It was very effective. This technique, I think, works so well to get inside Tom Hanks's character's mind that in the final battle, we return to that sense of perspective, seeing it through his eyes. I think we identify with his character all the more for seeing a battle through his eyes and ears for that period of time. Even shot at that one great moment where the camera rises above the water and sinks below, and the soldiers are underwater, we're above water. And the shifting of perspective back and forth. Above water, the battle is chaos, it's cacophony. Underwater, it goes completely away. It's a cocoon, it's safe. And then into that scene come bullets, and then the soldiers are killed. And by the way, just as an example of how a sound effect that is not so horrific can be used for a horrific sound effect, the bullets underwater is actually from a recording I did for a movie called The River Runs Through It, which was fly casting sound, and there was a sound of a fly line being lifted, ripped off the surface of a river. That line whip sound was really distinctive, and I remembered it, and we used it for the bullets underwater itself.
So, we'll get these explosions, specific explosions. These are separate from the artillery incoming sounds that are going to be next. Again, separating things for control. We often used a deep off-screen explosion. It's like orchestrating music. If you wanted something low and powerful, you could find your moments, put it down there. It's like having a deep drum hit. So these are the incoming minus the explosion. So you see each explosion is preceded by an artillery by. You see a few explosions and bullet hits, but you don't see a lot of that. So the soundtrack was able to tell the story of all the things going on around us, that we know the scale of the battle from the sound, almost more from the visuals.
Visceral use of sound was crucial in conveying the brutal, chaotic nature of war. John Williams, the famous music composer, spoke about his collaboration with Spielberg on the film.
D-Day, 1944, I have to tell you, I was about 12 years old at that time. And I was an ardent follower of the newspaper each day. So we could see the progression of the armies in Europe and in the Asian campaigns and so on. We didn't have television, so we'd hear the reports at night on the radio and watch it graphically displayed on the front pages of the newspaper. But I think more than any particular recollection of that specific day, what I, of course, carry with me is memories, a vivid memory of the period when the country was so focused and completely unified in its effort in the war that brought people together in a way perhaps that it hasn't happened in our history. I didn't read the script of Saving Private Ryan. Typically, working with Stephen, if I can, prefer to see the film to get a pristine impression from it without having preconceptions from the script. And I was enormously moved by it. I mean, it's I think one of the, shall I say, great war films that we have, and found it very, very touching and very moving, and somewhat unique, I think, for Stephen and for me, was the fact that we didn't use so much music in the film. Most of the battle scenes were done in a realistic way, so we had the sound of the tanks and the sound of the guns and all of the atmosphere of the struggle realistically portrayed. And the music really struck the emotional part of it, and the quieter scenes, really. We recorded the score in Boston with the Boston Symphony Orchestra and Symphony Hall in Boston, which many of the people who might see this will know that that's one of the great music halls in the world. Just anecdotally, Tom Hanks was with us that day and was sitting in the audience in the empty Symphony Hall with Stephen just sitting in the balcony. I called an intermission for the orchestra at one point and asked Tom Hanks if he would read the letter, Lincoln's letter that General Marshall read in the film to the orchestra, so that they would have a sense of, if they hadn't seen the film, they were playing the music, but they didn't know what was happening on screen.
I feel how weak and fruitless must be any words of mine. Would attempt to beguile you from the grief of a loss so overwhelming.
And Tom very sweetly stood up in the balcony, and the acoustic is so great in Symphony Hall, he was able to read the Lincoln letter to the orchestra, and they were all enormously moved by it. It was a lovely experience for them, for the players of the orchestra and the singers in the chorus. The Hymn to the Fallen, which is the music that closes the film, I may have proceeded in a way for me that was a little bit unusual in that I think I wrote the hymn as the very last thing. What I have tried to do in many films that I've done is to try to pretty much work the ending out so that I know where the musical material is going to land and develop, and then decompose it and take it apart, so to speak, so that individual strands of a more mature thing can be exposed singly and then collect together in the end of the film. Not in this particular case. The Hymn to the Fallen was kind of a set piece that seemed to be required. One felt like you had the sense that we needed a kind of requiem almost for the people lost in the film. And how to do that tastefully and discreetly and quietly and hopefully elegantly was the opportunity that it presented. And of course, chorus and orchestra is still the best medium for that kind of thing.
Now let's shift gears and speak about a masterpiece in thriller and suspense, No Country for Old Men. In contrast to Spielberg, the Coen brothers' No Country for Old Men is notable for its frugal use of music and strategic use of silence. By stripping away traditional sound cues, the film creates an atmosphere of unpredictability and dread. Sound of footsteps, the hum of the winds, and even the absence of sound build the tension and reflects the film's stark and existential themes. This minimalist approach intensifies the suspense, turning even the quiet moments into opportunities for dread.
The best example of this comes right before the midpoint of the film, during the sequence where Llewellyn is pulling the satchel of money through the vents at the motel. First and foremost, the amount of little but impactful sounds that are used in this scene are the reason it is so immersive. The droning hum of the road, the groaning of the engine, and the beeping of the tracker are the only things audible in the beginning of this sequence. It's as if we are no longer watching a film. We are now a fly on the wall in this psycho killer's truck, and we are painfully aware that the beeping of that tracker is gradually getting quicker and quicker. This brings me to my next point. The Coen brothers expertly designed the sound in this scene to not only immerse the viewer completely in the world of the film, but to also manipulate the viewer into feeling anxious. They did this using volume. The tracker, for example, is the loudest sound in the scene at first. Everything else is very quiet, including the almost silent squeal of the truck's brakes. This draws all our attention on the steady beeping of the tracker. The way it increases in pace as it gets closer to the money mimics that of an anxious heartbeat, which sets the tone for the rest of the scene. Once Anton gets into the motel room, the sound design creates a juxtaposition between the audio in his room and the audio in Llewellyn's room. Every sound that is made in Anton's room is soft and quiet, only audible because of the complete silence that is present. The flick of the light switches, the creaking walls, the cocking of his air gun, and the hissing of the air tank are all incredibly subtle. Conversely, every sound that is made in Llewellyn's room feels obnoxiously loud. He stretches the duct tape aggressively, bangs the vent cover against the vent, slams the pole against the vent wall, and then to top it all off, the satchel makes a loud squeak along the floor of the vent. This contrast between the two rooms is what makes this scene so suspenseful and stressful. The fact that we can hear every little sound that Anton makes tells us that the environment is quiet. When we have the knowledge that the environment is so quiet, we assume that Anton must be able to hear such loud noises coming from Llewellyn's room. This makes us, the viewers, incredibly anxious. Every bang and slam made by Llewellyn is immediately juxtaposed by the utter silence that surrounds Anton.
The quietness in this scene makes the lock pop and the gunshot really stand out from everything else. The lack of score contributes to this as well. In music theory, to make the loud parts louder, you must make the quiet parts quieter. Even in this firefight, we can hear the motel owner's cat's every lick in crisp detail, signifying the quiet town being flipped on its head. Every footstep weighs on the audience in anticipation due to the lack of score, because the audience can hear how loud they are and know that Anton can hear them. This is my favorite gunshot from the sequence. You can hear the pop of Anton's suppressed firearm separately from when the bullet strikes the ground. This helps the audience feel the distance our protagonist is trying to get on the madman. You can even hear the tiny bits of asphalt landing back onto the ground after the bullet spins fast enough as it ricochets, making that spring sound. The sound designers left no stone unturned. Even the quietest sounds are there. We can hear the sound of blood oozing out of his side after being shot.
In conclusion, we were able to see how sound is not just an enhancement, but a vital component of storytelling. Saving Private Ryan and No Country for Old Men offer two exemplary yet very different uses of sound that showcases how deeply sound can impact a film's atmosphere, tension, and emotional vibrancy.